Have you ever met someone who seems strangely calm in situations that overwhelm everyone else? Not louder, not smarter, not more confident, just different. They notice things other people miss. They make decisions without constantly seeking approval, and somehow they don't seem controlled by the same invisible pressures. The strange part is that most people never realize what separates them, because these behaviors don't look extraordinary from the outside, but psychologically, they're incredibly rare. And by the end of this video, you might discover that you've been doing some of them all along, or you might realize why they've always felt so difficult. The average person spends much of life reacting to expectations, reacting to fear, reacting to what everyone else is doing, not because they're weak, but because the human brain evolved to prioritize belonging over individuality. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your group could mean death. So your nervous system learned a simple rule: stay connected, stay accepted, stay safe, even if it means ignoring yourself. Today, the danger is gone, but the programming remains. And that's where the first divide begins. Some people unconsciously follow the old script. A small percentage learn how to notice it, and that changes everything. What makes these people different isn't talent, it's awareness. Psychologists often describe awareness as the ability to observe your thoughts rather than immediately becoming them. Imagine sitting beside a river instead of being swept away by its current. Most people live inside the river. A few learn to watch it, and that simple shift creates 7 unusual behaviors. The first behavior is that they can sit alone without feeling incomplete, not because they dislike people, but because their sense of self isn't entirely dependent on external feedback. Research in self-determination theory suggests that psychological well-being grows when identity comes from internal values rather than constant validation. These people still enjoy connection. They simply don't need it to feel real. The second behavior is surprisingly uncomfortable. They regularly question their own beliefs. The brain loves certainty because certainty saves energy. When you challenge a belief, the brain often treats it like a threat. That's why cognitive biases exist. They're mental shortcuts designed to protect existing viewpoints. Yet rare individuals willingly examine their assumptions, not because it's pleasant, but because they understand that growth often begins where certainty ends. The third behavior is that they change their minds when evidence changes. Most people confuse consistency with strength, but psychologically, flexibility is often a greater sign of maturity. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and adaptation, works best when it's allowed to update. These people aren't attached to being right. They're attached to seeing clearly, and that distinction quietly changes the direction of their lives. The fourth behavior may be the rarest. They tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term meaning. Behavioral psychology calls this delayed gratification. Studies have repeatedly shown that the ability to resist immediate rewards is linked to better outcomes across many areas of life. But this isn't really about discipline. It's about vision. When you clearly see a future version of yourself, today's discomfort becomes easier to carry. Most people negotiate with discomfort. These people learn from it. The fifth behavior is that they spend more time observing than performing. Modern life rewards performance. Social media, in particular, teaches the brain to seek attention because attention activates reward circuits. Every notification becomes a tiny signal of approval, a small dopamine pulse, a brief feeling of significance. But people who develop deeper self-awareness become less dependent on those signals. They ask a different question, not how am I being seen, but what am I actually experiencing? One question creates a performance, the other creates a life. The sixth behavior is often misunderstood. They are comfortable saying no. Many people struggle with this because rejection activates neural pathways similar to physical pain. Saying no risks conflict. Conflict risks disapproval, and disapproval still feels dangerous to an ancient nervous system. But healthy boundaries teach the brain something powerful. You can disappoint someone without losing yourself. And once the brain experiences that repeatedly, fear begins to loosen its grip. The seventh behavior ties everything together. They pay attention to their attention. This sounds simple, but it changes everything. Your attention is the brain's spotlight. Whatever sits inside that spotlight grows larger. Fear, gratitude, resentment, curiosity, all of it expands through attention. Most people spend their attention unconsciously. Rare people invest it deliberately. And that's why their lives often look different from the outside. Not because they have different brains, but because they use the same brain differently. So how do you develop these traits? Start with one simple framework. Think of your mind as a house. Most people spend their lives rearranging furniture, changing habits, changing routines, changing appearances. But rare individuals focus on something deeper. They become the owner of the house rather than a guest inside it. First, create small moments of solitude. Even 10 minutes without stimulation can strengthen self-reflection and reduce dependence on external input. Instead of reaching for your phone during a quiet moment, simply sit with your thoughts. Second, question one assumption each week. Ask yourself, what if the opposite were true? This trains cognitive flexibility and reduces mental rigidity. Third, practice intentional discomfort. Choose one challenge that stretches you, a difficult conversation, a workout, or a creative project. This teaches the brain that discomfort is information, not danger. Fourth, set one boundary without over-explaining yourself. Every healthy boundary becomes evidence that self-respect and connection can coexist. Finally, protect your attention. At the end of the day, ask yourself one question. What received most of my attention today? Because what receives attention eventually shapes identity. And perhaps that's the real difference. These 7 behaviors are not signs of superiority. They're signs of ownership. Ownership of attention. Ownership of beliefs. Ownership of choices. The people who practice them aren't free from fear. They simply stop allowing fear to make every decision. So if you recognized yourself in some of these behaviors, stay curious. And if you didn't, stay curious anyway. Because becoming a different person rarely begins with a dramatic transformation. It begins with noticing a single thought, a single choice, a single moment of awareness. And sometimes that's enough to change the direction of an entire life.